If you had asked me 5 years ago to describe my life, I would have told you it was stable. Not perfect, not dramatic, just steady. And I liked it that way. I met Lauren 12 years ago at a mutual friend's engagement party. It wasn't some instant, head over heels kind of thing. We talked for a bit near the drinks table, mostly joking about how neither of us knew half the people there. I remember she was wearing this light blue dress and had this way of smiling that made you feel like you'd just been let in on a secret. It was easy being around her, even then. We ran into each other again a few weeks later at a small get-together, and by the third time, it stopped feeling like coincidence. I asked her out to dinner, and she said yes. The date wasn't perfect. I spilled a drink trying to impress her with some clumsy story, but she laughed it off, and by dessert, I knew I wanted to see her again. It didn't take long for us to click. We moved in together after a year and got married the year after that. She was grounded, sharp, the kind of person who remembers birthdays and notices when you've had a bad day before you even say anything. I've always been more of a head-down, work-focused guy, but she made me better at the other stuff, at slowing down, at paying attention. We built a life together, plain and simple. I run a logistics business that I started from scratch back in my 20s, and once it grew enough, Lauren came on board to help with operations and admin. She's always been ridiculously organized and had a good sense for people, so it worked. We never stepped on each other's toes at work. We had our roles, and we stuck to them. Home life was equally solid. We bought a house just outside the city, nothing flashy, just a well-kept two-story with a fenced yard and space to breathe. Lauren made it a home. She had a knack for design, even if she swore she wasn't creative. Every room had her touch. Color choices, furniture arrangements, little routines like lighting a candle after dinner or putting on quiet music while she folded laundry. It wasn't dramatic. It just felt lived in. It felt like us. Our daughter, Ellie, came along a few years into the marriage. She's 16 now, and like most teenagers, she lives in a world that runs on sarcasm and Spotify playlists. But she's a good kid, bright, independent, quick with a comeback, but still kind when it counts. She's always been close to Lauren, and honestly, I've loved watching that bond grow over the years. The two of them have their own little language sometimes, inside jokes, glances that say more than full sentences. I'd be lying if I said I always kept up, but I never felt left out. It felt like a family. That was us, steady, familiar, a rhythm that made sense. One thing about life with Lauren, it was never chaotic. We had our routines, and honestly, I think both of us liked it that way. She always woke up first. Not early by any stretch, but just ahead of me, like her internal clock was perfectly synced to the house. I'd come into the kitchen and find her halfway through her first cup of coffee, scrolling on her tablet, catching up on the news, or checking her calendar. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd just be in the same space quietly. It never felt forced. Weekdays were pretty structured. I'd head into the office, and she'd either work from home or stop by the company to handle whatever was needed on the HR side. She kept our hiring process tight and made sure we didn't fall behind on compliance stuff. She was firm but fair with the team, and I'd heard more than once that she was the one people went to when they needed things sorted out. I liked that we could work together and still come home without carrying the job into dinner. Speaking of dinner, she was the planner. I'm a decent cook when I have to be, but Lauren had this habit of planning meals for the entire week every Sunday. We didn't always stick to it, but it made things smoother. Ellie usually popped in and out during meals, depending on her mood or how much homework she had. If she stayed long enough to finish her plate and make a few snarky comments about our parent energy, we called it a win. Weekends were slower. We took turns sleeping in. Saturday mornings usually meant coffee runs, maybe a trip to the local market, and cleaning up the house while music played in the background. Ellie would roll out of bed around noon, complain about chores, and then blast music in her room while cleaning at her own pace. Lauren and I would sometimes sneak out for a late lunch or early dinner. Nothing fancy, just a spot we liked downtown with decent wine and a quiet booth in the back. She was always good about keeping in touch with friends. I admired that about her. Even with work and parenting and everything else, she made time for people. Brunches, quick calls, little notes dropped in group chats. I'm not nearly as good at that. My circle's smaller, more casual. But she helped balance that. Made sure we showed up at the right birthdays, brought the right wine to the right events. That kind of thing. At night, after the house had gone still, we usually watched something together, old sitcoms, the occasional documentary, whatever we could agree on that didn't take too much emotional investment. We'd both end up half asleep on the couch more nights than not. And honestly, I never minded. Those quiet, in-between moments were some of the best. They didn't need to be big to mean something. Looking back now, I think the thing I appreciated most about our life was that it didn't feel like it was constantly demanding something from me. It was comfortable, familiar, easy to move through, like we both knew our roles and found a way to move in the same direction. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and I thought that was enough. If you had looked in on our life from the outside, you'd probably see what most people did: a well-managed home, two working parents who weren't trying to be flashy, and a teenager who mostly stayed out of trouble. We weren't extraordinary, but we didn't need to be. I think both Lauren and I took quiet pride in the fact that we just functioned. It's easy to overlook how much goes into that. The little unspoken things, like how she always refilled the dog's food bowl without mentioning it, or how I kept track of the bills without ever saying, "I paid the mortgage today." There was a rhythm we fell into early in our marriage that we just never stepped out of. We trusted each other to handle our corners of the life we were sharing. When people talked about how hard marriage could be, I'd nod politely, but deep down, I felt like we'd figured something out that most hadn't. We didn't fight much, not because we avoided conflict, but because we usually didn't need to. If something came up about work, Ellie, house stuff, we talked it through. No dramatic sit-downs or raised voices, just regular conversations. And if we disagreed, it never felt like we were on opposite sides. It always felt like we were solving something together. We celebrated the usual milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, with a kind of quiet joy. Lauren liked planning small surprises. I'm not much for gifts, but she'd find thoughtful ways to mark time. A weekend away, a handwritten note, a dish she knew I loved. I tried to match that in my own way, stepping in more at home when her work got heavy, bringing her flowers on random Tuesdays. Nothing huge, but intentional. It worked for us. Ellie was always a big part of that glue. She kept us connected in ways we probably didn't even notice. Whether it was waiting up to hear how her meet went, or listening to her go on about some new show she was obsessed with, she made the house feel lived in. Her relationship with Lauren was especially strong, more like best friends than mother and daughter sometimes. They had their own rituals, their own shorthand. I didn't always follow, but it didn't bother me. It felt like a good thing. Safe. Lauren was the kind of person people relied on. Friends came to her for advice. Family leaned on her when things got messy. She handled problems with a kind of quiet confidence that made people trust her. Even at work, the employees came to her more than they came to me, and I owned the place. I never felt insecure about that. I was proud of it. Proud of her. If you'd asked me back then if I was happy, I'd have said yes without hesitation. Not because everything was exciting or perfect, but because it was ours. A life we'd built over years, not with grand gestures, but with thousands of small choices made side by side. There was comfort in that, a sense that no matter what happened out in the world, we had this base, this foundation to come back to. And in my mind, that was unshakable. It started small, like most things do. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made me stop in my tracks. Just little shifts that didn't fit our usual rhythm. Lauren became distracted, not absent, not cold, just a little further away than usual. The first thing I noticed was how much time she suddenly seemed to have for herself. Don't get me wrong. Lauren had always been good about carving out me time, and I respected that. She had her yoga classes, her coffee meetups, her long walks on weekends. But over a few weeks, those moments started to expand. A lunch with a friend would turn into an afternoon out. A yoga class would be followed by a spontaneous stop at the bookstore, and suddenly she'd be gone 4 hours. I didn't think much of it at first. If anything, I chalked it up to burnout. We'd been busy. Work, Ellie's school stuff, a few family obligations that had stretched us thin. I figured maybe she just needed space, and I wasn't about to be the guy who made his wife feel guilty for wanting to breathe. Then one evening, while we were finishing dinner, she brought it up. "I've been thinking about taking a few days for myself," she said, almost casually, as she pushed her fork around her plate. "Just a little break. Maybe a weekend or two in the city. Meet up with some old friends, get out of the house for a bit." I looked up from my plate, surprised, but not in a bad way. "Yeah? Like a solo trip?" She shrugged. "Sort of. Maybe stay with a friend for a night or two. Or just get a hotel and reset. No work, no obligations. Just me. I nodded slowly. Sure, if that's what you want. She smiled, a little quick, like she hadn't expected me to say yes so easily. It's not that I need to get away from you or Ellie. I think it would help. Okay, I said. Let me know what you need. And I meant that. I didn't feel threatened. We'd always trusted each other. She'd never given me a reason not to. A couple days later, she circled back. Told me she'd booked a hotel downtown for the following weekend. Said she was planning to meet up with an old college friend who just moved back to the area. I nodded, asked a few polite questions, offered to cover the costs. She waved me off and said she already had it handled. I didn't push. The day she left, she gave me a long hug before heading out. Not a rushed goodbye. Just normal. She had a small overnight bag, her laptop, and that air of someone stepping out of their usual frame. I watched her drive off, then stood there for a moment, feeling that odd, quiet space settle around me. The weekend passed like any other. I cleaned up the garage, caught up on some paperwork, took Ellie to get her haircut and groceries. Lauren texted me a couple of times, said the city was loud but fun, that it felt good to be out on her own again. And yet, I noticed something strange. She didn't call. Normally when she's away, even for a day, she'll check in, just to hear our voices. But this time, it was all text. Light, friendly, but distant. I tried to tell myself not to make anything of it. People unwind in different ways. Maybe she just needed to fully unplug. Maybe I was just being oversensitive. But still, something about it lingered. Like a room you walk into and can't say what's different, but you know something is. When Lauren got back from her weekend away, everything on the surface was exactly where we'd left it. She came in through the front door with her bag slung over her shoulder and a coffee in hand. Kissed my cheek, asked how things went with Ellie, commented on the weather. All very normal. Too normal, maybe. But I didn't have a reason, just a feeling. She looked rested, I guess. Lighter. And not in a bad way. But it struck me as odd how little she talked about the trip. Usually, after a getaway, even something short, she'd have stories. A weird Uber driver, a new favorite appetizer at some downtown restaurant, a store that reminded her of a trip we took years ago. This time, nothing. She said it was relaxing, that she mostly read and walked around, but the details felt thin. Like she was reciting from a script she hadn't rehearsed enough. I nodded along, smiled, didn't push. But I caught myself watching her more closely that evening than I normally would. Not suspicious, just curious. Like I was waiting for something unspoken to break through her tone. The next few days fell back into routine, but it didn't feel the same. Lauren seemed distracted. She spent more time on her phone, and I don't mean doom-scrolling social media like the rest of us. No, this was quiet texting, typed quickly, and then the screen face down on the table. I tried not to read into it. People are allowed to have private conversations. But when I walked into the kitchen one afternoon and she quickly turned the screen away, I felt something shift in my chest, not anger, just that slow tightening of a thread you didn't know was loose. I noticed other things too. She started going to bed later than me, saying she needed to wind down, read, stretch. I'd wake up around 1 or 2 a.m. and see the faint glow of her phone lighting the hallway as she scrolled in the living room. The first time, I offered to sit up with her. She smiled and said, "It's fine, babe. Go back to sleep." I did. But the next night, when I saw that glow again, I stayed awake longer. Then came the wardrobe shift. Subtle, but there. She started dressing up more, nothing outrageous, just a little more put together than usual for casual errands or work-from-home days. New lipstick. Freshly done nails. She brushed it off when I mentioned it, said she just wanted to feel more like herself again. I told her she looked great, and I meant it. But deep down, I felt like I was watching her perform a version of herself I didn't recognize. It wasn't the change itself that unsettled me, it was the timing. The way it all started right after her weekend away. I didn't accuse her of anything. Didn't even ask questions, really. I just paid attention. Ellie, for her part, didn't say much. She was caught up in her own world, friends, school, whatever teenage universe she was orbiting that week. But I noticed how quick she was to roll her eyes at Lauren lately, and how fast those small tensions would dissolve into quiet, cryptic jokes between them when I entered a room. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just in my own head. Or maybe I'd started to sense something slipping beneath our feet. It's strange how quickly you can start second-guessing the very things you used to trust. When you live with someone long enough, you start picking up on all the small details, the way they hum when they're thinking, how they talk when they're distracted, which drawer they always forget to close. Lauren and I had over a decade of that. I knew her moods, her rhythms, her silences. But lately, those silences weren't familiar anymore. They were too long, too carefully placed. It wasn't just her phone, although that was becoming a near-constant fixture. I'd come into a room, and she'd subtly shift her screen away. Sometimes I'd catch a half-second glimpse of an open message before she minimized it. No name, just a flash of a gray bubble and a longer pause than usual. I never said anything. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know what I'd even be asking. Why are you texting someone I don't know about something I can't see? That kind of question only makes sense if you're already sure something's wrong. And I wasn't. Not really. Not yet. The part that really got under my skin was how normal everything stayed. Or tried to. Lauren still cooked, still laughed at my bad jokes, still remembered to buy my favorite cereal when she went shopping. But the moments felt thin. Like she was playing a part instead of just living the day. It wasn't that she'd stopped caring. It was that she was pouring her energy somewhere else. And when she was with me, it was like watching someone try to keep a performance running while their mind was off stage. That weekend, she said she needed to spend a few hours getting some air, which in our household usually meant a solo walk around the park or a long grocery run she'd turn into her own sort of escape. This time, she dressed up a little more. Hair done, makeup subtle but obvious, a new sweater I hadn't seen before. I asked where she was headed, and she said, just errands, maybe a stop at the bookstore. I'll be back soon. I nodded, said okay. Watched her drive off. Then sat there, alone at the kitchen table, watching the condensation form on my glass like I was waiting for something to appear in it. I didn't follow her. I didn't call. But I did check the shared credit card account later that night, which I don't usually do. There was a charge at a small cafe across town, one I didn't recognize. No bookstore. No grocery store either. I stared at that single transaction for a long time, wondering what it meant, wondering why it bothered me. She could have easily stopped for a coffee. Maybe she met up with a friend. But the not knowing was starting to feel heavier than any specific answer I could come up with. Not because she was gone too long. Not because of any clear mistake. But because I realized I hadn't really been a part of her day in weeks. I'd become the person she updated, not the person she experienced things with. Even Ellie was quieter. Not rude, just distant. She kept to her room more, laughed less at dinner, gave one-word answers to questions that used to turn into full-on conversations. She'd always had Lauren's quick wit, and lately, it felt like they were communicating in a way I couldn't access. Sometimes I'd come around the corner and hear them laughing in the other room, only for the laughter to stop the moment I walked in. I chalked it up to teenage mood swings. Or at least I tried to. At night, I'd lie in bed and listen to Lauren brushing her teeth, moving through her routine like always. She'd slide into bed beside me, scroll on her phone, sometimes turn to say goodnight with a kiss. And every time, I'd think, this is what it looks like when everything is fine. It looked fine. It acted fine. But it didn't feel fine. And that, somehow, was worse than anything I could prove. The funny thing about suspicion is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in around the edges. It hides inside routine. One day, you're pouring coffee like always, and the next, you realize you're watching your wife out of the corner of your eye, not because she's doing anything wrong, but because you're waiting for her to. Lauren hadn't really been gone more than usual, but her presence felt thinner when she was here. She smiled at the right times, laughed when something on TV was funny, asked how work was going, but there was a sense of detachment underneath it all. Like she was talking to me on autopilot while her mind was somewhere else. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. We'd both been under a lot of pressure. Work had been hectic, and Ellie was going through the usual mid-semester storm of school stress and social drama. Things ebb and flow, right? Still, it was becoming harder to shake. The other night, we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie neither of us cared about. Lauren was curled up beside me, her phone in hand, screen angled slightly away. It buzzed once, twice, then again. She didn't answer, just stared at it. I glanced over, not trying to snoop, just instinctively. She caught me and gave me this quick smile, like a reflex. Then she put the phone face down and said, just some work stuff. But it was Saturday, nearly 10 p.m. What HR work happens on a Saturday night? I didn't press. I nodded, smiled back. But something about the exchange sat wrong in my chest, like I'd bitten down on something that wasn't food. Later, when she went upstairs before me, I sat there in the dark for a while, thinking about how many of our conversations had started sounding like excuses. Harmless, polite, and empty. Ellie had been quieter, too. Not hostile, just careful. I started to notice that she and Lauren spent a lot of time talking in hushed tones when I wasn't around. I'd come into a room, and they'd shift, redirect, move on to something generic. That was new. I'd never had reason to doubt that I was in the loop with both of them. We weren't one of those families where dad was just the guy who paid the bills and hovered at the edges. Or at least, we hadn't been. One afternoon, I asked Ellie how things were going, school, friends, the usual. She answered, but the words were clipped. Distracted. I tried to reach for something more personal, asking if she and her mom were planning any outings soon. She shrugged. I don't know. Probably. Everything good? I asked. She gave me a look. Not angry. Not nervous. Just blank. Yeah. Why? I wanted to say, because the house feels like it's hollowing out in front of me, but I didn't. I just nodded and went back to my laptop. Later that night, I stood outside our bedroom while Lauren got ready for bed. I could hear her humming softly in the bathroom, just like always. I watched her reflection in the hallway mirror, fixing her hair, checking her face. And I had this sudden, sharp thought. Who was she doing that for? It felt cruel to think it. Unfair, even. But it landed hard, and it didn't leave. Still, I didn't look through her phone. I didn't follow her or track her or ask loaded questions. I just waited. Waited for something to confirm what I was starting to feel but couldn't name. Maybe it would pass. Maybe I was imagining it. But part of me, deeper than I wanted to admit, was already bracing for the answer I wasn't ready to hear. It happened on a Wednesday. Middle of the week. Middle of the day. Nothing remarkable about it. I'd gone into the office early that morning for a meeting that ended up getting canceled. Instead of sticking around, I decided to head home and surprise Lauren and Ellie with lunch. Something easy, sandwiches from that cafe Ellie liked, the one with the overpriced iced tea she always complained about but still ordered. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked still. Car in the garage. Curtains half drawn. I let myself in quietly, not out of any real intention to sneak up on anyone, but just out of habit. I figured Lauren might be on a work call, and I didn't want to interrupt. As I walked down the hall, I heard Ellie's voice. She was upstairs, in her room, and it sounded like she was on speakerphone or FaceTime with one of her friends. I slowed down, not intentionally eavesdropping, just listening in that absent way parents do when they're half curious about what their kid's up to. What I heard stopped me cold. No, seriously, it's hilarious, Ellie was saying, her voice light, almost giddy. My dad has no clue. Like, none. He thinks mom's just been working late or whatever. Meanwhile, she's out with that guy, like, all the time. There was a pause, laughter on the other end of the call. I'm not kidding, Ellie continued. She literally came home one night with his cologne still on her. I told her, you should at least shower before pretending you were at Target. And she just laughed. She was like, he's never going to figure it out. He's too busy being everyone's reliable little husband. Like, she actually said that. The air in my lungs stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. She calls him Plan B now, Ellie added, laughing again. Like, oh, I'll go home to Plan B if Loverboy doesn't show up. I mean, it's kind of messed up, but also kinda iconic. I stepped back from the hallway like I'd touched something burning. Plan B. I stood there, frozen in place, holding a paper bag of sandwiches that suddenly felt like a joke. The rest of the house was quiet. Lauren must have been out, or maybe she was upstairs, too, in another room, unaware that her daughter had just peeled back the entire curtain of our life in less than 2 minutes. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't interrupt the call. I didn't even throw the food away. I set it on the kitchen counter, walked into the garage, sat in my car, and just stared at the dashboard. I don't know how long I was out there. 5 minutes. Maybe 30. It didn't matter. Time stopped being something I understood. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears, like it had taken over the world. I had no idea who the man was. No idea how long it had been going on. But that didn't matter either. What mattered was the laugh in Ellie's voice, the casual cruelty of the words, the fact that this was not a new secret, but one I'd been left out of for a very long time. Plan B. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't rage or storm through the house demanding answers. I just sat there, quiet and still, while the life I thought I had came apart around me. And for the first time, I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew. I didn't go inside that day. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand explanations from Lauren or press Ellie on what I'd overheard. I drove to a locksmith instead, paid for same-day service. By 5 o'clock, the locks were changed. They weren't coming back into that house, not without me letting them in. And I wasn't going to. I stayed calm. There was a strange kind of clarity that set in once the denial died. Like some inner noise finally went silent. I didn't need more proof. I didn't need to catch her in the act. Ellie's words had been enough. And Lauren's silence, all those subtle shifts and polished excuses, they made sense now. Too much sense. The next morning, I woke up early. Bagged every piece of Lauren's clothing, her makeup, her shoes. Every drawer she ever called hers, emptied. Her side of the closet, cleared. Ellie's room too, every single item. Backpack, posters, desk clutter, all of it. I wasn't angry when I did it. I wasn't throwing things, breaking picture frames, or yelling into empty rooms. I was efficient. Focused. I carried each load to the front yard and left it there. One after the other. Piled it neatly. Like a delivery of consequence no one had ordered but had fully earned. Then I wrote Lauren a message. No subject line. Just a single sentence. I know everything. Don't come back. I watched the typing bubble appear. Then disappear. Then again. Then nothing. No message. I waited. She didn't call. An hour later, she tried to unlock the door. I watched from the upstairs window as she rattled the handle, then rang the bell. She stepped back and looked up at the house, confused at first, then something closer to nervous. She called my name once. Not loud. Not desperate. Just a little uncertain. Then her phone buzzed. Another message from me. You don't live here anymore. I let her stand there. I let her understand. Later that afternoon, I logged into our business accounts. Lauren was still listed under admin access, HR, and payroll mostly, but I'd been the majority owner since day one. It took 10 minutes to terminate her profile, remove her credentials, and flag the internal HR note that said she was dismissed for breach of internal ethics. I didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. I also pulled the last 3 months of financial statements from our joint accounts. Turns out she'd been skimming. A few transfers here and there, unapproved reimbursements logged as work expenses. Nothing massive, but enough. Enough for me to transfer the remainder to a secured personal account and flag the shared account for closure. By evening, she'd started calling. I let every one of them ring out. Ellie messaged too, longer than I expected. A weird mix of guilt, confusion, and teenage indignation. You can't just throw us out like that. My reply was short. I didn't. You both walked out a long time ago. I turned my phone off that night for the first time in years. And slept. Not deeply, but I slept. For real. No pretending. No half listening for footsteps across a floor I didn't trust anymore. Just quiet. In 24 hours, I lost my wife, my daughter's respect, and a life I thought was stable. But in that same day, I took it all back. And I wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not just in sound. Lauren's voice absent from the kitchen, Ellie's music no longer leaking from her room, but in presence. The air felt still, settled. I thought it would be heavier somehow, full of ghosts and regret, but it wasn't. It was like someone had taken the weight off my chest and replaced it with empty space. Space I didn't know I needed. I didn't rush to fill it. For once, I wasn't scrambling to fix anything. No more monitoring texts, analyzing silences, or wondering if my own family was playing a role I wasn't cast in. I worked. I cooked for one. I read. I slept early. I took long walks with no destination. Slowly, without realizing it, I started liking the version of myself that was left behind. The quiet one. The deliberate one. The one who had been kept busy with errands and emotional maintenance for a marriage that hadn't really existed in months. A couple of weeks later, something unexpected happened. Her name was Rachel. She was the wife of one of my company's former suppliers. We'd met a few times years back at vendor dinners and trade events. Always pleasant, always professional. She reached out after hearing about Lauren's departure, wanting to confirm a contract detail. The conversation should have ended there, but something in her tone stopped me from hanging up. She asked how I was doing, not just the business, but me. I answered more honestly than I'd planned. She paused, then said, "I've been through something similar. Would you want to grab coffee sometime?" I said yes. We met at a little place near the park. It was supposed to be an hour, maybe less, just catching up and exchanging empathy. But it turned into 3 hours. She was smart, candid, and unapologetically calm in a way that didn't feel like performance. She'd gone through her own betrayal 2 years prior. Less dramatic, more drawn out. But she understood the hollowing that happens when the person you trusted quietly exits the relationship long before you're told. We didn't talk about our exes the whole time. In fact, the most surprising thing was how easy it was to laugh. Real laughter. That thing I hadn't realized I'd been rationing for years. We started seeing more of each other. Not in a whirlwind way. Just steady, simple moments. A dinner here. A walk there. We shared books. Talked about travel. Sat in silence without needing to fill it. I wasn't looking for anything serious. Neither was she. But we both kept showing up, and eventually, we stopped pretending it was just casual. It was something better than that. Earned. One night, she told me she was pregnant. There was a pause, long and thick and real. I wasn't angry. I wasn't panicked. I just sat there, and for the first time in my life, I asked myself not what now, but what if? What if this wasn't a complication? What if this was a new start? Something honest, unforced, imperfect, but ours. I didn't flinch. I told her I was in. Not because I had to be. Because I wanted to be. Lauren and Ellie tried to contact me again around that time. I saw the emails. I read the texts. One even showed up on my porch and left a handwritten letter. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I hadn't just shut a door. I'd sealed it. And across town, with someone who chose me without conditions, I was building something new. There's something no one tells you about starting over. It's not about finding happiness. It's about learning how to live without holding your breath. I don't think I fully exhaled until months later. After the letters stopped, the texts went silent, and the noise of the past finally gave up trying to be heard. That's when it hit me. I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. I was just living. Fully, quietly, and with both feet planted in a life I built from scratch. Rachel and I moved in together a few months after the baby came. A little girl, Avery. Quiet, alert, with her mother's eyes and a grip strong enough to wrap around my whole heart without trying. I never thought I'd be starting over as a father again. Not like this. But I'm not scared of the responsibility. I've already been through the hardest part. Losing trust in the people I once would have bled for. This, raising her, it feels like the first real thing I've done in years. There's no resentment in my house now. No double meanings, no secrets in the other room. Just routines, diapers, 4 a.m. bottles, laundry I never knew a baby could generate. And between all that, laughter. Real, belly-deep laughter. The kind that comes when no one's playing a role. Rachel and I take turns cooking, failing at it some nights, but laughing through it anyway. She still runs her business from home, and I've cut my hours back to part-time consulting. Enough to stay busy. Not enough to disappear again. Sometimes, I sit on the porch in the late afternoon and just watch the sky change. It sounds like a cliché, but when you've lived through the kind of emotional silence that betrayal brings, even the sound of wind feels like a blessing. I haven't spoken to Lauren since the day she tried the doorknob and found it wouldn't turn. Ellie sent one last message a few months back. It was longer than usual. No excuses, no anger. Just a kind of quiet explanation. She didn't know how to handle what she'd been caught in the middle of, and she chose wrong. I didn't write back. Not because I hated her, but because some wounds don't need words. They just need space. Maybe one day we'll talk. Maybe not. I'm open to the possibility, but I'm not holding on to it. As for Lauren, I hear things. She lost her job after the HR paperwork flagged her dismissal. The guy she'd been sneaking around with didn't stick around long after. Apparently, they tried living together. It didn't last. She moved to another city. I wish her nothing. Not well, not ill. Just nothing. She's not a part of the story I'm writing anymore. And that's the real ending. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just peace. This story started with a lie I didn't see coming. It ends with a child in my arms, a woman who chose me without condition, and a life that doesn't need explaining. I'm not a hero. I'm not a victim. I'm just a man who stopped waiting for an apology and started living like he deserved better. Because I did. And now, I finally have it.